My family thought I was an engineering school dropout. I stood in silence at my brother's award ceremony. Then the director of the Orbital Defense Initiative spotted me and said, "Commander, you're here?" The crowd went silent. My father nearly dropped his glass. The applause was thunderous. Every table in the grand ballroom of Zenith Hall lit up with camera flashes and raised glasses as my younger brother, David, stepped up to accept the Genesis Award for Aerospace Innovation. I sat in the last row, near the coat rack. I didn't belong anywhere else. My family wouldn't have invited me if they knew I planned to come. My name is Mark Dalton. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Sacramento, California. My family thinks I'm a failure, a city planning technician who never lived up to the Dalton legacy. That's how they explain why I dropped out of the elite Cavanaugh Aeronautics Academy during my third year and never reapplied. They think I washed out, cracked under pressure. Truth is, I left because I was recruited for something that doesn't exist on paper. As the spotlight followed David, I watched him flash the Dalton smile. Our dad, Victor Dalton, retired aerospace engineer and legend in his own mind, looked like a proud general saluting a victory he personally commanded. Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Aunt Lisa clutched her wine like it was an Oscar. All of them wore that same self-congratulatory glow they saved for family photo ops. I hadn't spoken to any of them in months. The night carried on with polished speeches and tightly edited tribute videos. My brother's face filled the giant projection screen, young, bright-eyed, flanked by schematics and prototype models. The audience clapped like trained seals. I kept my hands in my lap. Then came the keynote speaker, Dr. Hannah Elridge, director of the International Orbital Defense Initiative. The woman was a giant in aerospace circles, someone David would have killed to shake hands with. She walked up to the mic, elegant and sharp in a charcoal suit. She smiled, waited for the applause to die down, and then casually scanned the crowd. Then she saw me, and froze. Her eyes locked on mine like a missile finding its target. "Commander Dalton," she said into the mic, her voice dipping into something between amusement and disbelief. "I didn't expect to see you here." Silence rippled through the ballroom like a thunderclap. Glassware clanked. My father's wine glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. David's expression flickered, confused. I didn't say a word, didn't nod, didn't smile. I just sat there, perfectly still, like I'd been trained to do. Dr. Elridge recovered, clearing her throat and continuing her speech. But the damage was done. The room knew. And my family, especially my father, suddenly realized they didn't know me at all. Back then, everything in our house revolved around space. My dad, Victor Dalton, was a man of orbit and order. He had worked on propulsion modules for the old Atlas contracts and never let us forget it. At the dinner table, he didn't talk about our school days or ask how we felt. He talked about thrust ratios, payload weights, and why Russia would never catch up to us in space technology. David soaked it all up like a sponge. I did too. I just showed it differently. From the time I was 10, I was obsessed with orbital mechanics. Not just the equations, the patterns. I used to draw them on my bedroom wall in pencil. At 12, I built a working model of a guidance system from salvaged microwave parts. Won first prize at the state science fair. My dad barely looked up from his schematics when I brought the trophy home. "That's great, Mark," he said, already halfway through a paragraph. "Make sure you clean up the mess in the garage." David got praise for memorizing launch dates. I designed simulations. He got medals for attendance. I got sent to the counselor for inconsistent behavior because I'd disappear into the library for hours and forget to check in. Even when I got into Cavanaugh Academy, the most prestigious aerospace institute in the country, my father called me brilliant but erratic. That was his favorite phrase. A polite way of saying unreliable. Like my creativity was a liability. David, meanwhile, followed the template. Internships, recommendations, spotless transcripts. My father clapped him on the back after every semester. I kept my grades high too. But I challenged people, professors, protocols, designs. I asked questions that made people uncomfortable. Then came my third year. There was a man who came to one of my simulation seminars, unlisted on the attendee sheet. He never gave his name, just watched me present a countermeasure for orbital debris strikes. Afterward, he handed me a card with nothing but a black triangle on it. No text. No title. 2 weeks later, I was gone. They made it look like academic failure. Sudden withdrawal. They even staged a disciplinary warning for misuse of lab time. My dad didn't even call me. I got one terse email that read, "I hope you learned your lesson." But I hadn't dropped out. I had disappeared on purpose. The recruitment was off book. I was flown to an island in the Pacific. No maps. No communication. No civilian record. I became part of something bigger than Kavanaugh, bigger than even Victor Dalton's legacy. Still, when I called home 6 months later just to hear my mother's voice, she told me David was doing great. "He's really finding his purpose," she said. Then, after a beat, "How's the city job?" I didn't correct her. I just hung up. Let them believe I was a dropout. Let them believe I was the disappointment. Some truths are too heavy to explain over the phone, and I had taken an oath that wouldn't let me explain anything at all. The island was volcanic, hot, and brutally quiet. No landmarks. No Wi-Fi. No visible satellites overhead. The only constant was the sound of waves colliding against jagged stone and the hum of encrypted frequencies inside my earpiece. This was where I became invisible. They called it Facility 9. Not because it was the ninth, it wasn't. It was just what they told us to call it. Everything else was redacted. I lived there for almost 2 years, training under Commander Rajesh Vora, a man who once took down a weaponized satellite using only a laptop, a pressure suit, and a tether line made of carbonized silk. The stories about him sounded like comic book nonsense, but I saw him do things I still don't believe. We weren't trained like pilots or soldiers. We were trained like ghosts. We learned to dismantle orbital anomalies in zero light, to reroute data streams using only analog signal bounce, to navigate silence. Every morning started at 0400. Sim drills, physics under pressure, free-fall combat inside a blacked-out centrifuge chamber. We weren't just learning orbital defense. We were becoming part of it. Human failsafes for the things no country wanted to admit were real. Rogue killsats. Cloaked spyware arrays. Off-the-record space junk that wasn't junk at all. I got my first field op 8 months in. A silent intercept off the Philippine Sea, no explosion, no evidence. We removed a Chinese microsatellite disguised as debris. They never knew we were there. We were in the kind of program where success meant nobody heard your name. When I earned lieutenant rank, it came through a biometric file encoded with an old Kavanaugh cipher. The irony wasn't lost on me. There were no medals, no salutes, just a voice file from Vora. You're good at this. Better than anyone expected. Including me. By the time I made commander, I had orchestrated black site launches from Kazakhstan, shut down an illegal Argentinian sensor grid, and rerouted an ion surge that would have fried half of the GPS network over Europe. But at home, I was still the older one. The one who never got his act together. When I called for my dad's birthday, secured line, fake background noise, a whole protocol to sound like I worked in public infrastructure, he spent half the call telling me David had been invited to tour a private propulsion lab. See, he said, that's what happens when you stick to something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say I had just returned from a zero-oxygen repair pod, orbiting in a suit patched with industrial-grade tape after taking a glancing hit from a rogue bolt, that I had literally saved a communications net used by 4 allied nations. Instead, I said, that's great. David's doing really well. He grunted, like I was finally learning humility. Keep your head down, he said. Try to stick with something. I hung up and went back to my debriefing. There was another potential breach over Antarctica. Another mission no one would ever know about. Let them keep thinking I was stuck. At least they'd never know I was holding the sky together. Christmas was always the same in the Dalton household. Cold turkey, warm wine, and colder compliments. David had just finished explaining the specs of a compression module he helped design for a satellite launch system. Everyone clapped like it was a Broadway show. My father raised his glass. To David, he said proudly. He's everything the Dalton name stands for. I didn't even blink. Just sat in the corner of the den, nursing my drink and trying to look like I wasn't counting the minutes until I could leave. Mom sat beside David with a hand on his knee, beaming like he had just split the atom in our living room. At least one of our sons found his purpose, she said lightly, with the kind of smile that carried just enough venom to sting. She didn't say it to hurt me. That was the part that always got me. She meant it as a compliment. I forced a small smile and took another sip of cider. Across the room, Cousin Blair cornered me like a well-meaning shark. Blair was a lawyer in San Jose, the kind of person who didn't let a holiday pass without mentioning her firm's latest settlement. You still at the city? She asked, swirling her wine. Planning? Sidewalks or something? I nodded. Something like that. She gave me that pity smile I'd seen too many times. You know, she leaned in, dropping her voice like we were sharing state secrets. I have a junior assistant position opening up in my office. Nothing fancy, but I figured, you know, if you wanted to get your foot in a more professional door. I almost laughed. I wanted to say, I spent last week inside a subterranean vault receiving classified commendation for neutralizing a cyber-sabotage attempt on the International Space Relay. I wanted to tell her I'd earned a medal when I couldn't show for preventing an incident that would have turned half the globe's internet infrastructure into scrambled noise. Instead, I nodded. I'll think about it. Because that's what I learned to do: smile, nod, blend in. After dinner, as the family gathered for dessert, David brought out a box of old family ornaments. Remember these? He asked. We used to hang them in the order of launch missions. He looked at me then, and for a second, I saw it. Something real. A flicker of, maybe guilt, maybe not. You used to know all the dates by heart, he said. I smiled faintly. Still do. He chuckled, nostalgic. You were the one who got me into this stuff. I shrugged. You made it work. And that was the line, the unspoken one between us. I had been the blueprint. He had been the model that followed it properly. I drove home in silence that night, the medal still in my glove box under a stack of receipts. No one in that house would ever know what it meant. And maybe that was the point. They saw what they wanted to see. And I had learned to survive behind the curtain of their assumptions, even if it meant disappearing every time they looked right at me. Thanksgiving dinner started the way it always did, with forced cheer, dry turkey, and a long speech from my father about family legacy. David sat at the center of the table, freshly engaged and glowing with success. His fiancée, Claire, looked like someone who had been bred to appear in alumni brochures. Polished, poised, pleasant in a way that felt rehearsed. When David stood to announce their engagement, complete with a presentation on the ring's design specs, everyone clapped like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. My mother wiped her eyes, whispering, finally, someone who fits. I raised my glass with everyone else, said congratulations at the right time, smiled on cue. I'd had practice, but my phone had been vibrating in my pocket since the second course. I excused myself to the hallway and checked the encrypted line. No words, just a file name. Arctic, red, 743. I knew what that meant. An active asset, possibly a downed satellite, had entered uncontrolled descent near a strategic zone. We were on a hair trigger for escalation. I had to leave. Now, back in the dining room, I grabbed my coat. David caught my eye, still beaming. Heading out, he asked. Yeah, I said. Something came up. My father gave me that sideways glance, the one he perfected over years of subtle judgment. During dinner? I'll make it up to you, I said. My mother snorted lightly. Of course. Mark and his emergencies. Claire tilted her head politely, like she was trying to understand. City planning must be very unpredictable. There were laughs. Muted ones, but I heard them. I didn't bother explaining. Within 4 hours, I was on a military transport in sub-zero gear, flying toward an Arctic facility no one officially acknowledged. A defunct surveillance satellite, old tech with a dangerous core, had gone rogue and crashed on the Russian side of a disputed sector. If the wrong people reached it first, it could mean international disaster. My team met at ground zero in the middle of a wideout. We operated with no lights, no signals. We found the wreckage, secured the core, and neutralized a secondary device that wasn't part of the satellite's original build. Someone had tampered with it. Someone wanted it to explode. We left with frostbitten fingers and a portable hard drive that would never appear in a press release. I slept 6 hours over the next 3 days. When I finally made it home, I found 23 missed calls. Most from my mother. The last voicemail was loud and sharp. I can't believe you missed Thanksgiving. David made a speech. Everyone was there but you. You make everything about yourself, Mark. You don't even try anymore. I sat there in my kitchen, still wearing the thermal pants from the field, and listened to her words echo through the room. She had no idea I just prevented a diplomatic crisis. No idea that the mission would earn me another silent commendation. That I'd risked my life in a bunker beneath frozen ice so that the world, including her, could keep scrolling through engagement photos without a hitch. But none of that mattered. In her eyes, I was the son who missed the turkey, the flake, the failure. I almost didn't go. The day of David's award ceremony, I sat in my truck outside Zenith Hall for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the glowing marquee with his name in tall white letters, David Dalton, recipient of the Ascendant Engineering Medal. People streamed past me in tuxedos and cocktail dresses, clutching programs and smiling like they were headed to a Broadway premiere. I could have driven away. No one would have noticed. No one had invited me. But something pulled me in. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the part of me that still wanted them to see. I left my jacket on, kept my hands in my pockets, and slipped through the side entrance just before the lights dimmed. The ballroom was a gleaming gold amphitheater. Rows of high-backed chairs, a massive projection screen behind the podium, and an enormous satellite mock-up rotating slowly from the ceiling like a chandelier made of steel. I found an empty seat near the back, just like always. Hidden, watching. David walked on stage like he owned it. He'd always been good at that. Confident, clean-cut, charming. The kind of man people wanted to believe in. As he launched into a speech about modular propulsion efficiency and orbital redundancy frameworks, the crowd ate it up. My mother sat near the front, glowing. My father was upright in his chair, arms crossed with pride. Then the keynote speaker stepped up. Dr. Hannah Elrich. The same woman who had pinned a silent medal on me last year in a concrete-walled facility 6 stories beneath the Mojave Desert. The same one who once told me, if you ever die on duty, we won't bury you, we'll erase you. She scanned the audience with ease. Sharp. Poised. Then she stopped. Her eyes locked on me, just for a second. Her brows lifted, just slightly. Then she smiled tight and amused and stepped up to the podium. Thank you, David, she said, turning toward my brother with an approving nod. Your contributions are impressive and vital. Then, her tone shifted. Just a fraction. But before I begin my full address, I'd like to acknowledge someone in the audience I wasn't expecting to see tonight. She turned to the crowd. Commander Dalton. I didn't know you'd be here. It landed like a missile. A hush swept the room. Even from the back row, I could hear the intake of breath. My father sat up so fast his chair creaked. My mother dropped her wine glass. The sharp sound of shattering glass cut through the silence. David turned, confused, scanning the rows. I didn't move. I just straightened my posture slightly. Eyes forward. Calm. Trained. Dr. Elridge smiled faintly, then continued her speech as if nothing had happened. But the room wasn't the same anymore. Then another figure stood near the stage, Admiral Greer, defense liaison for the Polaris Recon program. He leaned into the mic during the closing remarks. And special thanks to Commander MD, who played a crucial role in the recent Polaris mission. Some of you may not know what that is, and you're not supposed to. But let's just say it was essential. He didn't say my full name, but he didn't have to. I stood as quietly as I had entered and slipped out through the same side door. Behind me, the murmur swelled. My family was still in their seats, stunned, trying to piece together who I was. And for once, they had no words. The invitation came from David the next morning. Just a text, short and simple. Dinner at the house tonight. Just us. Please come. For the first time in years, I didn't hesitate. I put on a clean shirt, left my badge in the drawer, and drove over like a man going into surgery, calm, numb, but knowing something important had to be cut open. They were all waiting in the dining room. Same table, same chairs, same chandelier that buzzed faintly when the heat kicked on. My father sat at the head, hands folded tight. My mother looked like she'd aged 10 years since the night before. David stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, eyes flicking to me, and then back down again. Sit, my father said. I did. No one spoke for a long moment. Then, David cleared his throat. So, Commander. I let out a breath. Yeah, that's me. Mom blinked hard. But, we thought you were working for the city. We thought you dropped out. That you failed. I didn't fail, I said. I left. 3rd year. I was recruited into a program that doesn't advertise. What kind of program? David asked, though I could tell he already knew enough to be afraid of the answer. I leaned forward. Orbital defense. Surveillance, satellite security, global threat response. You know how people talk about keeping the lights on? My job's making sure they don't get turned off forever. Jesus, he whispered. My mother looked pale. But why didn't you tell us? I gave a sad smile. Because I couldn't. It's part of the deal. No records, no communication outside approved channels. I had to fake the dropout. The disciplinary notice. Everything. But we thought, her voice cracked. We thought you gave up. My father finally spoke. Why didn't you say something the second you could? Because you didn't want to hear it, I said, softer than I expected. Even before I left, you already had your minds made up. Brilliant but erratic, remember? He looked down at his hands. Didn't argue. David looked up. You were at my award ceremony. You've been in the shadows this whole time. Watching us. Not watching you, I said. Avoiding you. But last night, that wasn't planned. Dr. Elridge just recognized me. I didn't go there to make a scene. But you did, my mother said. And now we're sitting here wondering who the hell our son really is. I nodded. Then let me tell you. I told them about the island. The missions. The training. I left out the classified details, the names, the locations, the near-death moments. But I gave them the bones, enough to paint the picture they never bothered to imagine. No one interrupted. When I was finished, I leaned back. That's who I've been. And I didn't tell you sooner because I didn't think you'd believe me or care. David looked like he'd been hit by a wave. I would've, he said quietly. I do. My mother wiped her eyes with her napkin, silent. My father cleared his throat. I underestimated you, he said. Thought you were chasing sparks and smoke. I didn't see the foundation. That's because you never looked, I replied, not cruel, just honest. He nodded once. That's fair. David broke the silence next. So, what happens now? I looked around the table. I don't know. I'm not here to demand anything. I just wanted the truth on the table for once. And now it is, my mother whispered. For the first time in a decade, we sat there, not as the Dalton legacy, not as the failure and the golden boy, but as people. Flawed, blind, and finally starting to see each other. The food was cold. The air was thick. But somehow, it felt like a beginning. The Daltons never did small holidays. Independence Day was always a backyard production, flags, sparklers, burgers with hand-ground beef. For years, I'd shown up late, left early, or skipped it entirely. But this year was different. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was the sign on the front lawn. It wasn't a flag or a banner. It was one of Dad's old metalwork pieces, usually saved for garage sales. But this one had been repainted. Etched into the metal was a nameplate. Commander Mark Dalton, Orbital Division. U.S. Department of Strategic Aerospace Operations. I blinked. It wasn't classified. It wasn't specific. But it was real. It was public. My mother met me at the porch with a nervous smile and a plate of still warm cookies. "I hope you don't mind," she said quickly. We thought it was time." I stepped inside. They'd set up a small display in the hallway near the family photos. Nothing flashy, just a dark wood shadow box with a few service coins, a folded flag, a certificate with enough black ink to make it look appropriately mysterious. At the center, a framed photo of me in uniform. Not a promotional one. A real one, taken after a debriefing on-site in the Pacific, sweat-stained and serious. "How did you even get that?" I asked. "David found it," she said. "We asked around. Pulled some strings." Her voice softened. "We wanted to get it right." I walked into the backyard. My father was flipping burgers with one hand and adjusting the Bluetooth speaker with the other. He wore an apron that read, "Grill Sergeant." It was old. From when we were kids. When he saw me, he didn't hesitate. He wiped his hands and walked straight over. "Boys," he called to the cousins tossing beanbags. "Come say hello to Commander Dalton." He said it plainly, not with pride layered in arrogance, but with the steady tone of someone finally realizing the weight of a name. "Glad you made it, son," he added, offering a firm handshake. I took it. He pulled me in for a hug that didn't feel forced. "You hungry?" "Starved," I said. "But no corn salad, please." "Still allergic?" "Still dramatic about it," I smirked. He laughed. It felt easy for once. Later, David and I sat on the porch steps, watching the neighborhood light up with fireworks. "Mom says you're staying through the weekend," he said. "Unless someone starts jamming telemetry in low orbit." He chuckled. Claire made a list of questions. "She's dying to know what Polaris Recon was. Tell her it was a weather balloon." He grinned. "That's what I said." We didn't talk about the years we lost. Not directly. But it was there, in the small talk, in the shared glances, in the silence that finally felt comfortable. No one treated me like the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the mystery relative in the corner. They didn't ask for details. And I didn't offer any. But for once, they saw me. And this time, I didn't have to disappear. It wasn't the kind of promotion you read about in a press release. No marching band. No press conference. No medals pinned in daylight. But the room said everything. It was held in a soundproof chamber beneath a federal building with no official name, just a numerical code on the elevator panel. Inside were fewer than 50 people. All of them had clearances deeper than the Mariana Trench. My name wasn't read aloud, but the rank was Director of Orbital Asset Defense, Tier 1 Command. Equivalent to a brigadier general, they said. Only this general didn't have a public profile, or a published rank, or a proper bio anywhere but the archives of the black budget. But this time, I wasn't alone. My family sat in the third row, an odd but permitted exception. They'd gone through 3 weeks of background checks and 2 separate vetting sessions. The room didn't call them guests. The official file labeled them controlled civilian observers. My mother wore a navy blue blazer and kept clutching a tissue even though she hadn't cried. My father sat perfectly still, suit pressed, his mouth a flat line, not out of disapproval, but reverence. He didn't blink much. I don't think he wanted to miss anything. David looked almost nervous, sitting beside Claire. He hadn't stopped glancing around at the faces in the room. He recognized a few. Everyone did. These were the people who operated on maps the public didn't get to see. When they called me forward, I walked without ceremony. No music. No anthem. Just footsteps on polished concrete. A senior director presented me with a document I wasn't allowed to take home, and a patch I couldn't wear in public. And then she smiled, rare and genuine, and said, "It's not often someone makes it to Tier 1 from the inside. But you've earned it." Quietly. Precisely. Completely. When it ended, there was no reception. No photos. Just a single hallway with an armed guard and a reinforced door. But my family waited. Outside, under the midday sun, I turned toward them. My father stepped forward first. He extended his hand, firm, respectful, and then pulled me into a strong hug. He didn't say much. Just, I was wrong, and that was enough. My mother touched my cheek, eyes glassy. "We were wrong," she whispered. "But we're learning. Thank you for still letting us in." David shook my hand, then clapped me on the back with a grin that didn't feel forced anymore. "You always were the better engineer," he said. Just took me a while to admit it. I didn't need a parade. I didn't need speeches. Truth didn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needed a hallway, a few honest faces, and the quiet weight of understanding. As we walked to the cars, my mom slid her hand into the crook of my father's arm. Claire asked David if he remembered where they parked. And I walked a step behind them, not hidden, just seen. That was enough.